Okay, so you're ready to start your laminate project. You've got your materials, you've got your tools laid out, you've got all the furniture cleared out of the room. Now where do you start? This is I guess the starting point or the actual layout of the floor is not something that I think people typically think a lot about once they're getting into a project. You know, they spend a lot of time picking out, you know, what type of product do they want? Is it laminate? Is it vinyl? You know, obviously the color and the texture and you know, the aesthetic type stuff, and think about kind of the process and the tools that you need. But when you actually start a project, what I think can be a challenge that people don't really think about at first is actually how you get the thing started. And it's really kind of critical, and it's key to make sure that you have a good product, a good finished product that actually looks good and looks like it's done professionally. So I want to give you a couple tips that I kind of go through when I start a project that I think will help you a lot. So one of the first things you need to determine is which way do you actually want the laminate to run. And in some cases it doesn't make any difference, you know, which direction, across the room you actually run the product, but in some cases it does. And especially, I'll show you another installation that we had a long hallway to go down, and I definitely wanted to have it run down the hallway because I think it would look best. I'll show you that video here. So here's an example of an installation where we had a long hallway to go down. And so as you can see, we actually ran the planks with the length of the hallway. This was, in this particular install, I thought it was going to look strange if we ran all the boards perpendicular to this hallway. So it's definitely something to consider when you're trying to determine the layout. So as you can see in that installation, it made a big difference. That was actually, you know, in a kitchen, dining room, down a hall, and it was kind of a bigger install. This case here, we're working on a kitchen, and really could have probably done this one either way, but just the way that it laid out, I decided to run the boards this way. Because I had doorways to go through, and I'd rather go through the doors this way as opposed to this way. And also, I also think that sometimes when you've got a window, so there's a kitchen window there, I think it looks nice to have the light from the window come in and actually run perpendicular with the boards. So, I mean, there's different things that might change the actual orientation of the floor, but that's going to be probably more kind of an aesthetic thing than anything, unless there's a long hallway situation. Now, where you really need to get serious about how you start this thing. So for example, on this floor, I started in this doorway right here. I knew I was going to be transitioning to carpet, and I knew that the kitchen was going to be the easy room in this install, and I'd be able to get most of the installation done fairly quickly. This kitchen then comes into turn this light on, fan is kind of loud, but comes into this hallway here, and this hallway was challenging just because there's, in one little space, in about a 4x4 space, I had 4 door transitions that I had to deal with. So I didn't want to start there, I wanted to finish here, and then we kind of go off here into a mudroom space. But anyway, I knew that I wanted to start at this door. So then the next consideration, and this is where you really need to give some careful thought to how you start, is are you able to start with a full plank, which actually in this case, it turned out, I think I actually did start with a full plank there. Or do you actually need to rip your boards down lengthwise? And depending on the room, ideally you would probably like to have your rip boards be the same width on either side of the room. So like, for example, you've got whatever, call that 2.5 inches on the opposite side of the room. You know, if you can really see the wall, it'd be nice to have 2.5 inches on that side as well. Now in this kitchen, my primary concern was to make sure that as I carried out the installation, that I didn't run into any areas where I would have a very thin kind of sliver. So for example, where I came into the countertop here, I've got probably 4 inches there. I did not want to have a situation where let's say this board would have stopped and I would have had, you know, a little 1/2 inch sliver there that ran into the countertop. That would have been a problem. Makes installation more challenging and it doesn't look very good. So what I would recommend is when you get started, come to the area that you want to start with and then start taking measurements to basically every wall or transition area where you know you're going to have to make a rip cut in your boards. So in this case, I want to measure from my starting point. The first point is going to be over here to the edge of that kitchen cabinet. I've got a cut over here to, this is a cold air return in the floor. This actually was probably the narrowest cut that I had to make, and I just had to kind of live with this one, but you want to know where this transition is going to come here. Coming into the doorways aren't as big of a deal, but it's kind of nice if you can have those, you know, so you don't end up with a little sliver here. There's just a particular spot where I got a little bit thin, but that one turned out to not to be a problem. Walls are a bigger deal. Again, wall here, you don't want to end up so you have a narrow little sliver against the wall, and then just kind of, you know, and both sides of the wall too. So you want to look at this side of the wall where it stops. It'll come around your door jamb, and then this side of the wall over here where it picks up. And in this particular case, you know, again, I was working in a little hallway here that was pretty challenging. So those are the things that you need to consider. Even if you have like a floor register here, you don't want to end up where you know, you have a little bit of sliver on the edge that you have to make a cut when possible. So what I do, and what I'd recommend that you do, so I'm just going to, and I should have showed you this before I actually did this installation, but I'm just going to go to where I'm starting, and I'm just going to start measuring off to each area where I know that I'm going to make a cut. And so, for example, over here, and I'd run a straight edge along this cabinet over here, so I knew where this line was. But I'm just going to estimate, and we're going to say that that is, we're going to call that 39.5. I do the same thing over here. I just run a straight edge along this transition here, where this floor cutout needed to be. And I'm going to say that one's like probably 13, and this would have been about 13 3/4. Let's just say I'd measure all the way to this kitchen cabinet over here, which is an important transition. And that one there would have been about, looks like 110.5, roughly. We'll call that 110.5 just for demonstration purposes, and so on and so forth. And again, I'd measure each place where I come into a contact with the wall, so I know if I can start with a full plank there, or do I need to rip that plank down to get everything so it transitions properly. So the next question then is, how do you actually make that determination as far as where it's going to fall? And I'll show you that now. So in order to figure out your actual starting point and where you're going to make contact with each wall or barrier that you come up to, what I recommend is that you actually create a layout sheet like this. And I'll see if I can get this in close enough so you can actually see this. But what I've done, I don't always do this at home on a computer, but just so it's legible and easy for you to see, what I'll do is I'll actually measure the width of a board. So in this case, these particular planks that I'm using are 6 3/16. And what I'll do is I'll calculate down, and I'll just add up. And I just went down to 20 just for demonstration purposes here. And I'll add up and I'll figure out, okay, if I get to 20 boards, I'm just over 10 feet, I know that I'm at 123 inches and 3/4. And what I can do then is I can take these measurements and I can go back to where I made my various marks on the floor. So for example, coming into this kitchen cabinet, I'm at 110.5. So now I look at my layout sheet and I look at 110.5, and I can see that if I go to 110.5, I'm going to be just about an inch or so short of using that 18th board. So that's good, because that'll be almost a full board. Now on the flip side, let's say let's say you get to a measurement and your measurement is, let's say it's 112 inches. Well, if it's 112 or 112 and a half, then what that would mean was you would use all of 18 boards, and then you'd have just a small sliver. You'd have 3/4 of an inch, or I guess an inch approximately, of the 19th board that you'd be using to fill that gap, and that's a bad thing. You don't want to, really, I would say at minimum, sometimes you get in a situation where, you can't help it. But if you can, and you've got the flexibility based on your floor, try to give yourself a good couple inches to work with, so you don't end up with little slivers, and you're going to be the installation will go easier, and it will, and it will look better as well. So this is the basic layout sheet that I use. If you do this in Excel, which is how I did this, Excel will actually calculate the fractions for you, which is, obviously when you're using a tape measure, that's what you're looking at. Or if you have a construction calculator, you can figure that out too. The other thing that you can do, if you're just, on the job and haven't had a chance to do this layout sheet on a computer, and this is more often not what I end up doing, but you can just convert, so 6 3/16, just divide 3 by 16, and it's 0.1875. So one board is 6.1875, and then you can do the same math, and you can more easily do the math just with decimals, and then you can convert that back into fractions when you're actually doing your measurements. But this is the best way to do this. This will keep you out of trouble, basically. Okay, so just a couple other examples. Some of these measurements we had pulled. So from the starting point over there to this cabinet, this first cabinet next to the refrigerator, I kind of roughed out 39 and a half. And if you look at our layout sheet, 39 and a half. So 6 full boards would be 37 and an eighth. So we've got another 2 3/8 basically before we hit that cabinet. And as you can see, it's a little hard to see with the refrigerator, but here's where basically this is the 6th board here, this is the 7th board, and you can see on the 7th board from the seam there to the cabinet, we had that roughly, a couple inches there, which is, I don't like to get much thinner than that, but that one worked out okay. And then one more example, in this cold air return over here, this is where I had said was probably the smallest sliver. I say sliver, but I'll show you what I mean. So basically, this is what I mean by a sliver. So got this board here. This is the 2nd board, and I had to rip this down. And I quickly did this, this 13 3/4, and actually it's not, because it's actually tighter than that. But in any case, this is what I'm referring to as a sliver. You can see that's very narrow there. It's like 1/2 an inch that got laid along that edge of the cold air return. That's not ideal. It's really on the very narrowest side that you'd want to rip a board. But I knew that this that would go over the top of that, and that would cover it. So I couldn't really make it up anywhere else on the floor. I felt like if I had to have one narrow cut, I would just assume have it be there, so I went ahead and lived with it. But that 13 3/4, when I pulled this measurement, that actually wasn't a very accurate measurement, because 13 3/4 would have left us with, what is that? I guess about 1 3/8, but in reality, it's only about 1/2 an inch. And this is just because I just quickly pulled that measurement. But when I did this for real, I actually had what I do, and I mentioned this before, but I'll take a straight edge and I'll lay a straight edge along my edge here over to where I'm measuring off from, and that's the easiest, quickest way to get that measurement. But anyway, just a couple more examples to kind of show you why I go through all this. Something else that I like to do is I like to actually take some planks and go ahead and snap them together. I've got 5 here. I would say even if you put 10 of them together, that's even better, because what you want to do is verify your measurements. So when you're measuring here, this is 6 3/16, just happens to be what I want to do on the tape measures. I actually want to look for 30 seconds. You want to be extremely accurate, because if you start getting out 10, 15, 20 boards, a 32nd of an inch will throw this calculation off pretty quickly. So, measure a board and then go ahead and clip 5 or 10 of them together. And if you do that, so there's 5. So then I can verify I'm about 30 and 30 seconds for 5 boards and 15/16. That's pretty darn close. So this way, this just double checks, because again, if you're just measuring one, and if you're off by a little bit, it doesn't take very long for your measurement to get off. So just verify. The more you put together, this is 5, this is probably enough to verify, but if you put 10 boards together, then you really can be sure that this measurement that you came up with here is a good measurement. So that's how I go about doing that. Going through this layout process does take a little bit of time to actually put this sheet together. It's actually not bad. If you've got access to Excel, that's the best way to do it. I mean, in 5-10 minutes, you can actually put this together and you can end up with some very accurate measurements. And then by using this, you can get this floor laid out so you don't run into that situation where you've got just a small sliver. Or if you've got, maybe you've got a, kind of a uniform room and you really want it to look perfect, and you want to make sure that you've got your plank on one side of the room is about the same width as the other plank, or possibly you're going down a hallway. And again, if you get a long stretch down a hallway, that's going to be more visible. Your eye is going to pick up unevenness. So that's really probably a good time or an important time to try to make sure that you have equal width boards on each side of, up against the wall. You can use this sheet. You can really determine, you can lay it out, you can make adjustments, you can figure out, okay, I think I need to take off, say 2 inches off my first plank, lay that out. You may have to pull new measurements, or you can adjust your measurements, but okay, take 2 inches off, so that means that, everything is then 2 inches longer basically to your next transition area. But if you do that, then you can go back and you can recheck all of your recheck all of your obstacles, your cabinets, your doorways, your walls, and everything, and figure out if you're at a good transition place. If you're not, if you still have a sliver somewhere, maybe you need to go another inch or an inch back the other way, and you just have to kind of play with it. It takes a little bit of time. If you're doing a larger space that has a lot of transitions, but take the time, and I think you'll be happy that you do. It'll provide the best result for sure. And you can, when you're done, you can be happy that you took that time and you've got a professional looking installation. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of complicated. It's a little bit hard for me to understand. It's I've got it in my mind how I do it, but hopefully I was able to explain it in a way that makes sense. I've got a couple other videos. I've got one that shows kind of the tools that I like to use, or that you'll find very helpful in installing laminate. I've got one that talks about how to deal with some of the difficult transition areas, like up against walls and up against cabinets, and then especially under doors, under door jambs. And then I also have one that's just kind of a laminate installation for beginners, that I do a simple, actually right there, I do the entry coming into this house, that kind of shows just the step-by-step of the basics that you'll need to be able to do installation. So I'll put links to those at the end of this video if you want to check those out. If you found this helpful, do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll continue to bring you more home improvement how-to videos.